It's very interesting, this patient case that you presented to us, who again is dealing with this chronic low back pain, and how you addressed the issues with elevated uric acid and insulin resistance with this patient.
You're listening to the Applied Natural Medicine podcast, showing how the science of naturopathic, integrative, and functional medicine is applied by clinicians in real-world practice. This is a production of NDNR, publishers of the Journal of Applied Natural Medicine since 2005.
All right. I'd like to welcome everyone today to Naturopathic Doctor News and Reviews Applied Naturopathic Medicine Roundtable. I'm your host, Dr. Kareem Kandil. And here at Applied Naturopathic Medicine, we present clinical cases from practicing naturopathic and medical doctors, cases that illustrate the application of naturopathic medicine in real-world patient care. Again, through our NDNR continuing education platform, we offer the opportunity for naturopathic doctors to get access to continuing education credits as needed. And again, as we mark our 20 years of publication, NDNR, we are grateful to Activation Products for supporting this milestone. Now, today's topic is an interesting one from our July issue on musculoskeletal pain. And I found this to be particularly unique in terms of, again, a very unique approach to looking at a chronic musculoskeletal pain condition. And the topic is Beyond Gout, Elevated Uric Acid as a Hidden Driver of Insulin Resistance and Chronic Pain. And our contributor today is Dr. Anjana Subramanian, who is joining us from Bangalore, India. She's a medical doctor, certified in natural medicine, a pain clinician, medical herbalist, and functional medicine practitioner with over 15 years of experience. She's the founder of Recover Integrative Medicine, specializing in musculoskeletal pain, autoimmune conditions, infertility, and fibromyalgia. She's trained in natural medicine using herbal formulations, functional nutrition, movement therapy, yoga, and acupuncture to treat the root cause. As a certified yoga therapist, corrective exercise specialist, and sports nutrition specialist, Dr. Anjana shares her insights via recoverphysiotherapy.in on Facebook at Recover Integrative Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Anjana, again.
Well, thank you.
Again, as I mentioned, it was a very interesting topic, this concept of elevated uric acid as a hidden driver of insulin resistance and chronic pain. Now, I've definitely seen in the functional medicine space that there has been this increased awareness around the importance of monitoring uric acid, especially as a biomarker of inflammation and increased cardiovascular risk, in addition to its classic associations with gout. But it's very interesting, this patient case that you presented to us, who again is dealing with this chronic low back pain, and how you addressed the issues with elevated uric acid and insulin resistance with this patient. But let's just briefly talk a little bit about uric acid and its clinical significance beyond gout, and the importance of looking at the functional range versus kind of what would be considered maybe the standard reference range with uric acid. I'd love to just hear a few of your insights on this.
So uric acid is quite a handy marker, as I found out from this recent case. So number one is uric acid. What are the applications apart from gout? I would definitely like to say that because it is a marker of purine metabolism, it also tells us how we are utilizing protein. And uric acid also increases in the body when there is a breakdown of nucleic acid. So we can definitely say that this particular marker can be used indirectly for oxidative stress as an oxidative stress marker. At the same time, inflammation, because when there is a systemic inflammation in the body, the xanthine oxidase pathway starts getting activated. And when xanthine oxidase pathway starts getting activated, the body starts wrapping more of the purines into uric acid. When uric acid is not being excreted properly, either through stool or urine, is when it starts accumulating in the body. So through this, we can say that it is an inflammatory marker, When we do not have access to, or it can be also used in conjunction with the actual inflammatory markers like IL-6 and cytokines, when in either in the absence of those markers or in conjunction, it definitely helps us to know that there is an inflammatory condition going on. And inflammation is the root cause of many diseases. So if we can just bring the patient back to an immunomodulatory anti-inflammatory state, many of their problems we can get complete reversal to that. So that is my take on uric acid from this case I worked on. And I'm sorry, I didn't get your second question.
Basically, this was in regards to the importance of looking at the functional ranges when it comes to uric acid, because as you mentioned in your article, again, uric acid, many substances that the body produces as part of its metabolism, isn't necessarily inherently bad. It has its physiological purpose, has its antioxidant potential. But like everything, there is this kind of optimal range where a person is going to thrive the best. And whenever they are outside of their own individual kind of optimal range, this is when we start to see the manifestation of various pathologies. And just like a brief nod to the importance of the looking at that functional range and perhaps why some of the traditional cutoffs in assessing uric acid may have a certain application when looking at certain pathologies. Simply having a normal number may not tell us that accurate story of how well a patient is actually doing.
Yes, it's a great insight. So, in functional medicine, we work with very narrow ranges because they are considered to be optimal and they are within the optimal, and so they are within the prescribed lab range. In India, where I practice, our standard lab range is really wide for uric acid. For women, it is from, you can say, 0 to 8.9, and for men, it can vary between till 9 or 9.5, it can vary. But functionally, I would like to always keep the uric acid in between, or at least less than 5.9 for men and 5.5 for women. I would definitely like to keep it there, somewhere in the center, and not very low. I would like to have it somewhere between, say, 3 to 4, 4.5 is what. And even if it stretches to 5 or 5.5, yes, it is okay. But I would definitely not want it deviating out. And because functional medicine is relatively new in India, as doctors, we are rewiring ourselves to think about these functional ranges and keep our patients within these functional ranges. So for men, I would like to keep it 5.5, and women, say 5.9 would definitely be good. So anywhere between 5.5 to 6 for both the genders.
It's an interesting point of just how wide that reference range is in India. I think here in the US, it's closer to 7.9 is the upper limit of the range. And again, with many standard reference ranges, again, this is looking at a general population and essentially finding where the mean is, where that average is in terms of those numbers. But that isn't necessarily an indicator of what optimal or ideal health should look like, especially in the context of an overwhelmingly kind of chronically ill or dysfunctional type of population. Again, it's very interesting that within that functional range, we're definitely trying to aim on a more focused, narrower, lower range as an indication of overall better metabolic health. Now, I know within the context of oxidative stress, inflammation, one other kind of key factor is insulin resistance that kind of feeds into that. Can you talk a little bit about how that association between elevated uric acid and insulin resistance and how that kind of can lead to this metabolic and oxidative stress type of dysfunction?
Number one, linking uric acid to insulin resistance. There are some studies which have been done, which basically say that uric acid itself keeps the body in a pro inflammatory state. So, when our body is in a pro inflammatory state, we automatically activate the HPA axis, and thereby we naturally increase our serum cortisol. So, we are primed up for some stressor which we don't know, which is not an external stressor, but from within the body, but our brain does not recognize it. over a period of time, when our blood or rather serum cortisol levels increase, they naturally create a resistance, an insulin resistance at the periphery, trying to conserve the glucose for the brain and for the more important functions. So that is how uric acid creates a peripheral insulin resistance by just ramping up the inflammation in the body. And it is said that uric acid, elevated uric acid itself, it activates NLRP inflammasome. And now researchers have proved that, and some studies are going on to find out the exact mechanism. But right now, there is a direct correlation between uric acid, NLRP inflammasome. NLRP activates serum cortisol creates peripheral insulin resistance. So uric acid somewhere starts the dominoes effect of an insulin resistance, and I have seen it in many patients of mine. When uric acid is not evaluated much, I find that many of them are the skinny fat. So they still hold on to the cortisol belly. They are unable to lose weight, which is their primary focus, in spite of good foods, or rather clean diet or clean lifestyle, good exercise regime. And now I have understood that uric acid is the dominoes effect. I used to be wondering many a times as to why are they even insulin resistant after doing so many nice things. They would be having a cleaner life than me, but still they would be the skinny fat and quite frustrated about it. So now that I have known, and thanks to the research, that this is the link I have found.
Interesting. And in that talk of that elevated cortisol, insulin resistance, and inflammasome activation, I think another fact that kind of gets brought into this conversation is mitochondrial dysfunction and basically the impact on cellular bioenergetics. And anytime you have any sort of defect or impact on mitochondrial function, that's when essentially cells get stuck into this cycle of inflammation, this cell danger response, where it can be very difficult to break out. And it's interesting you talk about some of these patients who, again, are eating relatively cleaner and yet they're having these issues. And I guess that kind of brings to topic some of maybe the genetic differences of why some people seem to be perhaps poorer metabolizers of uric acid compared to others, even within same family members. So you may have one that, is prone towards gout and higher elevated uric acid compared to their siblings. Just a couple thoughts on some of the kind of the genetic and familial components that can potentially impact that uric acid metabolism.
So right now, I'm not so sure about whether there is a strong genetic component, because I have not done much research
Mhm.
or study in. And I have not seen many patients in my practice with familial dominance with uric acid and this thing. So usually we, at least till now, we have been associating, at least till the past year, I have been associating uric acid with gout, and no gout symptoms, no arthritic markers, then I would not bother much about uric acid. So even if there was a familial relationship, I never explored it from that perspective. But it is definitely great, and I would definitely look at it. I mean, I would definitely go through the literature and look at it and find out if there is a familial dominance. Generally, I find that people have a lot more lifestyle influences directly on uric acid and even mitochondrial dysfunction, rather than even the genetic component. Because I find that when there is an elevated uric acid, and if it is coupled with lifestyle factors like increased stress, or it is even coupled with bad diet, what happens is the mitochondrial dysfunction happens faster. The oxidative stresses happen faster, whether or not they may be carrying the gene. And definitely, like methylation, definitely there must be a marker for, or rather there must be a genetic predisposition. But right now I have not explored it. But I find that in my practice, lifestyle, if I can fix the lifestyle, if I can fix the underlying metabolic problem, I find that the response is at least 80 to 90%, which basically tells me that maybe the lifestyle marker is higher rather than the genetic component. Genetic component definitely must be respected, but I think the lifestyle component is something I would like to look at it more.
Okay. So this kind of gives us like a good sort of segue into the clinical case because within that we kind of address some of the contributors to the elevated uric acid. But let's just go into this patient who, again, this 35-year-old male who, again, is physically active, training 5 to 6 days a week, is attempting to avoid refined sugar, he's tracking their nutrition, taking some of these different type of natural product supplements, and he's coming in with this low back pain and this elevated hemoglobin A1C. And so, again, it seems that the A1C was the main biomarker that you saw being off balance, elevated at 6.1. He'd been being seen for this chronic back pain, and physical therapy was not appearing to impact it. Had normal lumbar spine imaging, so there wasn't any sort of mechanical dysfunction that needed to be addressed there. Within his lifestyle, there was a few things noted: very high exercise intensity, a lot of these protein bars and workouts, smoothies, and a lot of high fructose intake from natural products. Tell us a little bit more about this patient.
So this patient who came to me primarily with HbA1c complaint. So his main idea was to not be pre-diabetic because he did not want the label, and he thought that the HbA1c of 6.1 was the reason of his fatigue, memory fog, afternoon energy crashes post lunch. So he is a software professional and he travels quite a lot and quite conscious, and probably you can call him a health freak, so quite conscious and very regular on Instagram, tracking all the exercise gurus and all of that. So now so initially when he was diagnosed by me with insulin resistance, or I could say pre-diabetes, his number was around 6.2. And I told him to clean up his diet, lifestyle and things like that. So he was expecting a drastic reduction in his HbA1c level. But even after 3 months, when his level stagnated at 6.1, is when he was a little bit worried and worked up. And that is when he came back to me. So this patient is a highly motivated patient, but again, with any person who is extremely motivated, they tend to leave the moderation and just swing to the other extreme. So I would like to definitely, so this particular case also taught me as a practitioner the rule of moderation. Sometimes doing less is doing more, and sometimes doing the most appropriate thing is the best thing you can do. So that's what this case taught me. So initially, I had given him a lot of advice on going to the gym and working out, keeping consistency, and all of that. But what I probably missed in my initial advice was to keep it in moderation. Because even probably for me, as a clinician, I thought that doing more is good, but sometimes doing more is not good. And I feel that his excess amount of motivation, extreme amount of exercise could again have had a negative impact and probably could have caused more oxidative stress and put the body in more of a catabolic state than an anabolic or a balanced state in which I wanted him to. So that is what this particular case taught me, and this particular person taught me that sometimes when patients are highly motivated and they push us to do more, it is our clinical judgment to give them the right blend of things which is just right for them. That is what is customized medicine, and that's what I learned after 10 years of intensive clinical practice.
Initially, again, you were looking at his A1C. Tell us a little bit, at what point did you begin to investigate the uric acid and tackle that as an area of focus and being able to address this inflammatory excess state of things?
So, after 3 months of him following a regimental diet and intermittent fasting and regular exercise regime, it struck me that he was still not recovering. Not the number, but clinically also, he was not recovering much. He used to complain to me about memory fogs, bad sleep, and fatigue. afternoon energy crashes. That's when I took a retest and I found that still the HbA1c had stagnated. So that's when it struck to me that all the steps which I had taken for insulin sensitivity had not done anything, because there was something else which was basically masking and not allowing his cells to be insulin resistant. So I was not giving the body the right terrain it required. And that's when I went back into inflammatory markers. I did an HSCRP, I did an ESR to figure out if I had missed anything. And that's so in that panel, I had put in uric acid to just see how the inflammation is. And that's when it had come high. So this patient, even after 3 months of gymming, of good lifestyle, clean diet, still complained of fatigue, poor recovery, and persistent low back pain. So initially, I thought that probably he was recovering a lot more later, because he was initially quite sedentary, and from sedentary, he kind of jumped into exercising. But then I realized that his back pain was not going away. And that's when I had ordered the lumbar imaging, and his imaging came out fine. So that told me, and his vitamin D3 levels were good, B12 levels were good. So that's when it told me that something was not balanced. So the things which I had given to him for immune modulation, or rather to improve insulin sensitivity itself, they themselves were creating a lot more insulin resistance. They themselves were creating a lot more inflammation in him. Not even insulin resistance, they were creating a lot more inflammation. That's when I ordered an inflammatory panel for him. And that's where I found the elevated uric acid. And then I decided to go towards it after going through some literature. I wanted to look at uric acid as a metabolic marker, not just as a marker for gout or to rule out gout. So that's how I zeroed in on it and tried to rework the case.
Okay. Now that you'd seen that the uric acid is elevated, the first thing I kind of want to dive into, since this is the foundation of naturopathic medicine, is looking at getting the patient to engage in the proper health promoting lifestyle. And definitely appreciated the approach that you use. So one of the things that you advise the patient on is, fructose restriction. And again, I think, something that a lot of times people are unaware when it comes to uric acid. Obviously, the excess of dietary purines, especially as comes from animal protein, is a main source of kind of uric acid. But also, something that you may not be aware of is excess fructose can also drive that additional uric acid production. So it seems that you want him to avoid, these smoothies and energy drinks that tended to be a little bit higher in fructose. And likewise, these protein bars that might be a little bit higher in processed whey protein or other proteins, and focus instead more on these plant-based proteins, dal, millet, vegetables, obviously for the general kind of anti-inflammatory, health promoting, blood sugar stabilizing effect, but also in terms of being able to moderate both the intake of dietary purines as well as dietary fructose by getting them on this kind of whole plant-based diet. One of the things that you mentioned too, I think is important, is in regards to some of the indicators of that elevated cortisol that you see with some of these patients, that difficulty sleeping, that stress, and some of the things that you were focusing on to help with calming the nervous system and calming this kind of cortisol response. Warm lemon water, the nervous system reset by reducing training frequency. Because I think what you made a very good point about sometimes these highly motivated patients is they can go from one extreme to another. And just like with everything bio individuality wise, in terms of optimal lab ranges, optimal macronutrient intake, the same thing applies to physical training. And an excess in that can be detrimental, just as an insufficient amount of physical activity can be detrimental. Also appreciated the focus on breath work and evening walks, because again, walking is probably one of the best biomechanically sound, safe, supportive, all across the board health promoting physical activities humans can engage in, regardless of age and capabilities. I'm interested to hear a little bit about some of the herbal protocols. Now, some of these herbs we're familiar with a bit more. The Goxura tribulus, which is oftentimes used at least in Western herbalism, oftentimes for testosterone support. But I found it very interesting that it had these diuretic, anti-inflammatory, as well as uric acid excreting kind of promoting properties to it. And then, of course, berberine, which is a mainstay powerhouse when it comes to that metabolic support, oftentimes referred to as herbal Ozempic, even though I think it's not the best characterization for berberine, but this kind of AMPK activator definitely has been known for its pro-metabolic insulin sensitivity effects. But it seems that berberine, along with a number of these other herbs, also seem to have some benefits at lowering uric acid.
So berberine is, I can say that it is like a powerhouse herb. So usually when one effect of any herb is extremely dominant, we try to put it in that bucket. But herbs, phytonutrients, they come into every person's body, and they fill in the gap the person requires, is what is my understanding of using herbal medicine for over a decade. And here, in his case, I had used berberine mostly to modulate the gut microbiota, because berberine,
Mm-hmm.
when you give, you also improve the gut health. And more the gut diversity, the better is the gut health, better is insulin sensitivity, better is immune modulation, better is anti-inflammatory. So I had looked at it from that perspective, and definitely I had read some literature about it lowering uric acid by inhibiting xanthine oxidase. And in his case, definitely using berberine in the in a combination capsule or a customized capsule definitely helped him greatly. It improved his appetite, it improved his stress, it improved his sleep quality, surprisingly. And all these, the stress, the sleep, are not, berberine is not an adaptogen. But somehow, when I had put that in the blend, he immediately, after a week, he reported good quality sleep. He said his stress levels were a lot more lower, or rather, a lot more manageable, and he was not emotionally as frustrated. So I would want to go back to literature and find out if berberine has any adaptogenic effect. But here I definitely feel that it helped him to bring his uric acid levels down, to bring his inflammatory levels down, and generally improve his gut health, which set the stage for better healing.
Yeah, definitely. Again, you use a number of kind of unique herbs, some that are people who may be a little familiar with Ayurveda might be somewhat familiar with triphala, which is known as like a very powerful antioxidant blend. But in the same vein as you talking about this berberine helping to modulate the microbiome, it seems that, amongst the benefits of triphala is promoting that GI detoxification and dealing with this excess endotoxemia, which is oftentimes, again, a further trigger of that inflammatory cascade. I mean, again, trying to figure out where exactly in the cascade things started to break down, it can sometimes be a fool's endeavor. It's usually like these are cycles that tend to self perpetuate. You have a disturbance in that gut barrier integrity and gut microbiome. That's coupled with dietary influences that are off balance. You have this kind of increased feedback into this inflammatory cascade. And so it seems that sometimes taking a number of approaches to help mitigate that seems to be the kind of the best sort of supportive approach in these kind of more complex cases. I also saw it was interesting. You use this topical oil, Burgundy oil, which is, I guess, in the Vitex family, similar to cramp bark. But I guess that's an interesting kind of way of also adding some local sort of topical anti-inflammatory support for helping this patient deal with their low back pain as well.
Because he was quite concerned. See, pain, when we have pain, I find that, as I had been a pain clinician before I got into the field of functional medicine, and I was working, so I have majored in sports medicine. So I was working very closely with athletes. I still do. So I had realized in my practice that when you have pain, you may have a major problem, or rather a major dysfunction, or a minor dysfunction, or no dysfunction. It can be just a perceptual pain. But then when pain comes, the first thought, or everything around the person's thought process, is centered around mitigation of pain. So that is the narrative of the patient. They want to be off the pain, and they are not worried as to whether the pain has got this problem or this cause or that cause. Their thing is they have to be pain free. So I always find that giving something to the patient to manage their pain is usually beneficial, because they somehow have some control over the pain, and pain is a very uncomfortable, even sometimes a situation or a feeling which threatens your safety. So having them to feel safe is also one kind of immune modulator. It is also widening their safety net, making sure that the cortisol, the serum cortisol comes down. And that was my purpose of giving this patient the topical, because topical definitely acts as a local anti-inflammatory, but more so it improves the sense of control and safety. So it has got physiological and psychological benefits, and that was the reason for choosing this particular herb and for giving it in a form of a topical application.
Excellent. So it seemed like all of these interventions seem to help the patient on their recovery. I'm curious, did you recheck the uric acid kind of at the end of the patient case to see if that had trended downwards as a result of the interventions, or did you look at sort of more the resolution of the patient's kind of symptoms and complaints as that main metric?
So I generally review patients every month. So for in his first month review, it was based mostly on his subjective symptoms and my objective examination. Then the next month review, I sent him for a recheck of HbA1c and uric acid. His uric acid levels had come down from 8.2, it had come down to 6, which was still, according to me, a little bit more to my comfort, because I would like to have it less than 5, 5.5. It was at 6, but the patient's symptoms had come down to by 90%. He had no low back pain, his insulin sensitivity had improved. It had dropped to 5.6. So again, his next month review is due in August. So I would definitely take it and record it. So I'm very curious to see where the uric acid will be this month.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely be curious to see where that is trending for that patient. And with that being said, talking a bit about the future applications and being able to take this information and use it in some of these more challenging patient cases, do you consider that kind of as a general functional biomarkers that, more clinicians who are working on any type of clinical cases, be it a pain case, autoimmune, be it a cardiovascular risk factor case, that they should be regularly looking at uric acid amongst some of these other typical biomarkers we look at for inflammation, such as A1C, HSCRP, ESR, etc.
I would definitely request clinicians to look at uric acid, because it's such an easy marker to identify, number one, interpret, number two, and such an easy marker to work with. So it is always nice to work with a simple marker which actually which shows a very good cause effect benefit. So if you are able to work on the marker immediately, you get very good results with the patient and symptom resolution. And I would definitely suggest using uric acid as one of the markers to as a direct marker for inflammation and an indirect marker for oxidative stress, and even as a marker in conjunction to see the glucose dysregulation, because when there is insulin resistance, there is definitely inflammation, and when there is inflammation, there is definitely elevation of uric acid, whether or not the person has got musculoskeletal issues.
Excellent points there. And again, one of the many advantages of uric acid as a biomarker and test is it's been widely available for a long time, easily accessible, cheap, fast. It's not like this highly specialized take out alone type of spread of examinations. It's something that can be very easily, cheaply, and frequently repeated as necessary to be able to track the overall progress of the patient. So I think I'm trending to agree with you there that, again, uric acid is a very important biomarker for clinicians to be tracking in pretty much any of their kind of chronic health issues, whether it's musculoskeletal, whether it's autoimmune, whether it's more kind of cardiovascular or metabolic, that we can see that impact and use that as another general kind of trend to manage. And then, of course, there are, as you demonstrated, a number of both lifestyle interventions, a lot of different botanical herbal interventions. It doesn't just require that anyone with elevated uric acid be put on allopurinol. There's definitely something to be said about the wide spectrum of herbs. Many that, again, I think this is one of the beautiful things you find with a lot of herbs, that you may initially study them for one key constituent or pathway, and then later on you come to find out, like, oh, it also works on this pathway and that pathway, which again makes sense why they tend to be such harmonizing therapeutics that seem to work across a wide spectrum of conditions. They aren't focused or pigeonholed to just one mechanism of action. I think, again, you brought some very interesting insights and, again, a unique look at assessing kind of uric acid in the context of this patient that's dealing with this chronic pain. And again, I think that you used a number of factors, not only to address the lifestyle, not only to address the underlying inflammation, but as you said, also something that helps them deal with that pain then and there, which is, again, an important part of what we're doing as physicians, offering relief to patients. Just love to hear any kind of final thoughts, any sort of advice to any clinicians, in the functional medicine and naturopathic medical space who, again, come across these more complex cases that, may not seem to budge initially. Just love to hear your thoughts on that.
My thoughts would be there are two. Number one is always be prepared to unlearn, because what we learn, see, this space is evolving so fast. So what we have learned in medical school and even in our practice, at times when we see a real patient, and sometimes we have to unlearn. So always be prepared to unlearn and rework the case if it is not progressing the way we would want it to. And the second thing is always be open to explore, because this space in which we are, unlike conventional medicine, I have been in conventional medicine space. Unlike conventional medicine, we have room for a lot more creativity. So bring out your creativity. You can try a lot of permutations and combinations, because every body is unique, every physiology is unique, every biochemistry is unique. So you have a lot more permutation and combinations you can do, and a lot more good clinical results you can get. So be prepared to unlearn and be prepared to be creative. So that's all I would like to say.
I think that brilliantly hits the mark. I think that's something that is both necessary and a challenge for all kinds of clinicians. You've heard the little theme that they often say that in medical school, half of what you learn will be redundant by the time you finish, and it's up to you to figure out what that half is. And I think definitely some of the most innovative physicians in history have been those that have been willing to challenge their own thoughts and approach to things, and unlearning, willing to be open to trying something different, sometimes going against the opposite convention, and finding that, again, because of that uniqueness, that bio-individuality of every patient, we have to focus on treating that patient. We're not just arbitrarily treating a number or treating a condition. We're treating the human being that's in front of us. I think these bring a lot of wisdom to this, and feel very fortunate to have had you on today, Dr. Anjana, and I'm sure your patients are very fortunate to have you and your willingness to dive a little deeper, excuse me, and just rethink your approach to those cases when you're hitting that sort of roadblock. I think that's very important advice for all of our clinicians. And again, want to thank you for your time today. I would also like to, just as a reminder to everyone, remind you that NDNR's continuing education platform is available for further engagement. And that concludes our Applied Naturopathic Medicine Roundtable for today. Again, I'm Dr. Kareem Kandil. And again, want to thank you, Dr. Anjana Subramanian, for joining us today. And again,
Thank you
for
so much.
our complete case studies, clinical protocols, and naturopathic medicine continuing education, you can all reach this at ndnr.com. And with that, I'd like to wish everyone joining us a wonderful rest of your day, and want to thank you again, Dr. Subramanian.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise.
This has been the Applied Natural Medicine Podcast, a production of NDNR, publishers of the Journal of Applied Natural Medicine since 2005. Access the full archive of case reports and clinical insights at ndnr.com. For subscriptions, partnerships, or submissions, contact us at editor@ndnr.com.